General Hospital spoilers for Tuesday, August 12 reveal that Jason's heart had always been driven by a singular focus: protecting those he loved. For years, his loyalty had been unwavering, a compass guiding him through every trial, every battle. But now, as the stakes grew higher, as Britt's life hung in the balance and the world around him seemed to collapse into chaos, Jason found himself battling something he hadn't anticipated: a deep, gnawing regret and a desperate need to reconnect with a past he couldn't let go of. Sam had been his anchor, and come out the other side stronger. But that future, their future, had been shattered, and with it, the stability Jason had always known. Sam was gone. Her absence left a void in his life, one that had never truly healed. Despite everything, despite the battles he fought, he couldn't stop wishing for one more chance to see her, to talk to her, to feel that connection again. In the depths of his mind, as the weight of his responsibilities to Britt and the growing darkness surrounding her situation pressed heavily on him, Jason found his thoughts wandering back to Sam. His dreams, those fleeting, precious moments when he allowed himself to be vulnerable, were filled with her. He longed to see her once more, to hear her voice, to feel the warmth of her smile. In his quietest moments, when the world felt too heavy, he imagined what it would be like if she were still by his side, helping him navigate the turmoil surrounding Britt's health. But that was just it: Sam was gone. And that harsh reality was a wound that would never fully heal. It was as if his grief for Sam was interwoven with his determination to protect Britt. Every step he took in his mission to protect Britt felt like an echo of the past. Jason found himself not only trying to save Britt from the cruel hands of fate but also trying to reconcile with the ghosts of his past, particularly with the loss of Sam. His desire to find answers, to bring Britt back to safety, was no longer just about protecting her. It had become about redemption, about fixing everything that had gone wrong in his life. Britt's illness, her vulnerability, mirrored the painful truths Jason was trying to escape. But now, those painful truths were confronting him head-on. The further Jason plunged into the mission to save Britt, the more he fought to protect Britt, the more he realized he was also fighting to fill the hole Sam had left. But even in this struggle, Jason knew he could never fill the space that Sam had once occupied in his heart. No matter how much he wished for her return, she was gone. He would have to live with that reality, no matter how painful it was. In his darkest moments, Jason found himself questioning if he was doing all of this for Britt because he wanted to save her or because, deep down, he was searching for the solace he could never find in Sam's absence. Was he acting out of a sense of duty to his family, or was he trying to create something to hold on to? Something that would distract him from the pain of losing the one person who had truly understood him? This internal struggle began to cloud his every decision. It was about proving to himself that he could fix something, that he could do something right for once. He could no longer escape the painful truth that he had failed to protect Sam. But perhaps, not just for solutions to Britt's plight, but for ways to make his fractured world whole again. He couldn't bring Sam back, but maybe, just maybe, he could find a new purpose in protecting Britt, in making sure her life was not one more tragedy added to his collection. In the back of his mind, a quiet voice whispered that in saving her, he might find a piece of the peace he had lost. But the deeper Jason dug, the more dangerous the situation became. As the stakes grew higher, as his obsession with saving Britt and fulfilling a need for redemption took hold, Jason realized that he was on the edge of losing himself in the process. His actions were no longer driven solely by logic or love for Britt, they were becoming about something darker, something more desperate. His need to control, to fix, to mend the wounds of the past, was beginning to cloud his judgment. As Jason pushed forward in the search for a cure, the line between right and wrong became increasingly blurred. He no longer knew where his true motivations lay. Was he simply acting out of love for Britt? Or was he pushing to save her because it was the only way he could validate his own existence after losing Sam? He didn't know. But what he did know was that this fight, this endless pursuit of something he could not control, was consuming him. Every time he thought he was getting closer, the distance grew wider. Britt's condition continued to worsen. And Jason realized that his need for answers was becoming his greatest obstacle. His obsession with saving Britt, and his longing for Sam's presence, had taken on a life of its own. It was as though the two battles, one to save Britt, the other to heal his own broken heart, were fusing together in ways Jason couldn't control. Every action he took, every decision he made, was colored by his grief, his guilt, and his desperate need to prove to himself that he wasn't a failure. The weight of this dual battle began to take a toll on Jason. He could no longer distinguish between the urgency to save Britt and the aching void left by Sam's absence. The two emotions were intertwined, making every decision more difficult than the last. As Jason moved forward in his quest to protect Britt, the stakes became higher than ever. Every step brought him closer to the truth, but also further from the peace he sought. Could he save Britt without losing himself in the process? And, in the end, would it be enough to heal the deep wounds left by the loss of Sam, or was he doomed to carry that grief with him forever? Jason's journey had shifted. It was no longer just about protecting Britt, it was about coming to terms with the past, and with the loss he could never undo. The path ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear, Jason's quest for redemption had only just begun. Chase found himself standing at the precipice of a decision he never thought he would have to make. His entire career had been built on a foundation of duty, justice, and protecting the people he cared about, but now, everything was being tested in ways that threatened to unravel his sense of self. The request he had received was simple on the surface: perform an arrest. But the person he was being asked to arrest, the circumstances surrounding the situation, and the emotional turmoil it stirred in him made it anything but simple. Willow. Someone he had come to care deeply for. Someone who had become a close part of his life. Now, he was being asked to arrest her. Not because of a clear-cut crime, but because of suspicions tied to something darker, more elusive. But Chase could not ignore the growing sense of doubt in his own heart. He had always trusted Willow, believed in her innocence. But the evidence was beginning to pile up in ways that were impossible to ignore. The emotional conflict that raged within Chase was nothing short of maddening. He had always prided himself on his commitment to upholding the law, on his ability to separate personal feelings from professional duty. But this felt different. This wasn't just another case or another arrest. This was Willow, someone he had come to care for, someone whose life would be irrevocably changed by the actions he was about to take. The thought of arresting her, of turning her over to the authorities, filled him with a sense of dread he couldn't shake. The evidence against her wasn't conclusive, but the suspicion was growing. And Chase knew he couldn't ignore it. But how could he reconcile his duty to the law with his deep personal connection to her? As he walked the thin line between professional obligation and personal loyalty, the weight of the decision bore down on him. The more he thought about it, the more his world seemed to tilt sideways. Was this his job, or was it his emotions that were making the call? The idea that he could be the one to place Willow in handcuffs seemed almost surreal. But the truth was undeniable. His loyalty to the law was being tested in a way he had never anticipated. The deeper the investigation went, the more tangled things became. Chase was being forced into a corner. The more he tried to distance himself from the emotional aspects of the situation, the more his own inner turmoil took over. This wasn't just a case of duty anymore, it was a battle for his very soul. He was caught in a whirlwind of confusion, guilt, and fear, with no clear path forward. The arrest of Willow wasn't just a matter of professional duty, it had become a personal crisis. He felt like he was losing something precious, his peace of mind, his faith in the law, and perhaps even his own sense of self. The idea of arresting Willow gnawed at him, pushing him into a state of madness. Was he acting out of duty? Or had the personal emotions clouded his judgment so thoroughly that he was on the brink of a breakdown? He realized that whatever happened next would mark a turning point in his life. He had been placed in a situation that was beyond his control, and no matter the outcome, he knew he couldn't return to the man he had been before. This moment, this arrest, had the potential to shatter everything he thought he knew about duty, loyalty, and justice. It was an emotional battlefield, and he wasn't sure if he would be the same when it was over. What was worse was the nagging feeling that, even if he did arrest Willow, there was a greater force, his own guilt, that might never allow him to forgive himself. Drew and Willow stood awkwardly in the living room of Liz's house, the atmosphere thick with tension. Neither of them could fully comprehend how they had ended up in this situation, but the reality of it was undeniable. The house, usually filled with warmth and comfort, now found himself in a delicate position, one where the lines between loyalty, duty, and personal emotions were becoming increasingly blurred. And Willow. Drew couldn't help but feel the growing discomfort between them, a sensation that was impossible to shake off. The history between them was not lost on either of them, and yet, here they were, both of them uncertain of what to say or do next. It wasn't just the proximity that made the moment feel charged, it was the silence, the things left unsaid, and the quiet acknowledgement that their lives had become more entangled than either of them had ever anticipated. Willow, too, felt the weight of the moment. She had never imagined finding herself in Drew's presence in such a way, standing in Liz's living room, with everything about the situation feeling off-kilter. She had always considered Drew a friend, someone she could trust, but now, with the emotional currents swirling around them, she couldn't help but wonder if things had shifted in ways she couldn't understand. Drew's gaze, which had always been steady and sure, now seemed to waver ever so slightly, as if he were unsure of what role he was supposed to play in this unfolding drama. It was a subtle shift. It was the product of their own unspoken emotions, the things they each carried but were too hesitant to voice. Drew and Willow had both been through so much, personal challenges, losses, and conflicts, and now they found themselves trapped in a situation that only served to remind them of the complicated layers of their connection. They both knew the dynamic between them had changed, but neither of them knew how to navigate the new terrain. The air between them felt charged, electric with the tension of everything that had been left unsaid. It was as though both of them were waiting for something to break, for the silence to give way to something more real, but neither of them knew if they were ready to face it. Liz's house seemed to carry the weight of a history that neither Drew nor Willow were quite sure how to confront. And as they stood there, side by side, the air thick with unsaid words, it was clear that whatever had brought them together in this moment was only the beginning of a deeper, more complicated journey. The awkwardness wasn't just in the physical space, it was in their minds, their hearts, and the delicate balance of emotions they were both trying to make sense of. The question was no longer what they would say to each other, it was whether they would ever be able to confront the deeper feelings that had started to surface between them. Drew could feel the pull of an old connection, one that had been buried beneath the surface for far too long. His thoughts were clouded by the complexity of his feelings for Willow. Feelings he had tried to suppress but now seemed impossible to ignore. But with those feelings came an even deeper sense of guilt, guilt that he was unable to protect her when she needed it most. Guilt that had now woven itself into their relationship. The more he tried to push those feelings aside, the more they threatened to break free, adding to the emotional intensity of the moment. He wasn't sure if it was the right time to acknowledge them or if he should just leave things as they were. But the longer he stood there, the more impossible that seemed. Willow, too, could feel the shift. It was impossible to deny that the space between them was charged with an energy that neither of them could ignore. She had always felt safe with Drew, always trusted him. But now that trust was complicated by the emotions that she had been carrying for so long. Her heart raced as she fought to suppress the feelings of vulnerability that threatened to surface. She knew Drew was struggling with his own emotions, but what troubled her more was the realization that she wasn't sure where she stood with him anymore. The line between friendship and something more was becoming increasingly blurry, and Willow wasn't sure if she was ready to cross it, or if Drew was either. As they stood together in Liz's house, both of them grappling with their own emotions, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the unspoken questions hanging over them. The tension between them was palpable. And each moment that passed without a word only deepened the uncertainty. Drew and Willow both knew that something had changed, but neither of them was sure what that change meant for their future. They weren't just dealing with the emotions of the present, they were also contending with the unresolved feelings of the past, the ghosts of their shared history. The emotional weight was suffocating. It seemed like that clarity was slipping further and further out of reach. As they stood there, side by side, the tension between them was undeniable. A reminder of everything they hadn't yet confronted and everything they still had to face. And yet, despite the awkwardness, the silence, and the uncertainty, there was also something undeniable. A sense of connection that refused to be completely buried. Drew and Willow were standing on the precipice of something new, something neither of them could fully understand. But both were aware of its presence. The question, now, was not whether they would confront it, but when. The future remained uncertain, but the journey toward it had already begun. Emma had spent weeks meticulously gathering information, piecing together the clues surrounding Dalton's secretive experiments. What started as a curiosity quickly turned into an obsession. Her instinct told her that the only way to truly understand what Dalton was doing, and to stop him, was to infiltrate his lab. The idea of breaking into his world was both thrilling and terrifying. The laboratory was tucked away in the shadows, hidden in plain sight, but Emma knew the exact time to strike. She'd studied Dalton's movements, his routine, and the security system. Preparing for this moment. With a steady hand, she disabled the security, slipping silently inside the lab. The place was far larger than she'd expected, rows of workstations, computers, and shelves of equipment filled the space. Emma's eyes flicked across the room, scanning for any sign of what Dalton was hiding. She couldn't afford to waste time. Research documents detailing the horrifying experiments Dalton had been conducting. Each document sent a chill down her spine. The names of the subjects, the methods. The results, it was worse than she imagined. But it was the last file that struck Emma the hardest. Dalton's experiments were not just abstract or theoretical, they were personal. Involving people tied to her own past. The truth hit Emma like a tidal wave. Dalton had been experimenting on people she knew, people she thought were long gone. With the evidence in her hands, Emma knew she had no time to lose. She quickly grabbed the files and retraced her steps, moving as quietly as possible. The weight of the documents felt heavy in her hands. The truth more disturbing than she could have imagined. As she reached the exit and stepped into the cool night air, she realized the fight against Dalton had only just begun. The secrets she uncovered were just the tip of the iceberg. Emma had opened a door, and there was no going back. Carly sat quietly, her mind racing as she grappled with the weight of the situation. It was clear that Sunny's recent actions had pushed them all to a breaking point. What had started as a string of impulsive decisions was now spiraling into something far more dangerous. And Carly knew it was only a matter of time before the consequences would catch up with them. Sunny, once a man of reason and instinct, had become consumed by something darker, a need to control that was now clouding his judgment and leading him down a path of recklessness. She couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Sunny's obsession with maintaining control had taken on a life of its own, slowly unraveling everything they had worked for. He had always been unpredictable, but this was different. His decisions no longer made sense, even to those closest to him. He was no longer thinking clearly, his actions were driven by something deeper, fear, desperation. Perhaps even guilt, anything but logic. And as much as Carly had always stood by his side, she knew she couldn't keep watching him destroy everything they had built. The more she thought about it, the more it became clear, Sunny's actions were no longer just personal decisions, they were ticking time bombs, set to explode at any moment. His disregard for the consequences was reckless. And the tension it caused among those who loved him was palpable. Every move he made seemed to push them all closer to the edge. The business, their family. Everything they had fought to protect was at risk. And yet, Sunny remained blind to it all, consumed by his need to assert control over a world that was slipping through his fingers. Carly knew that something had to change, and fast. But how could she reach him? Sunny was stubborn, headstrong, and proud, qualities that had always served him well in the past. If left unchecked, he would take them all down with him. It wasn't just about the family business anymore, though that was a huge part of it. It was about Sonny's mental state. His inability to see past his own fears and insecurities. He was so desperate to hold on to what he thought he could control that he was alienating everyone around him, pushing away the very people who could help him see reason. His recent actions had made it clear, this wasn't just a temporary lapse in judgment, it was the beginning of a dangerous pattern. But more than that, it filled her with a sense of helplessness she hadn't felt before. She loved him, but she couldn't continue to sit back and let him destroy everything. His obsession with control had gone too far, and the ramifications of his actions were already being felt in every corner of their lives. She had to find a way to break through to him. To make him see that his need for power was blinding him to the reality of what was happening. But as Carly stewed in the weight of it all, she couldn't shake the fear that maybe, just maybe, it was already too late. Sonny's recklessness was starting to boil over into a full-blown crisis, and the more time that passed, the more impossible it seemed to fix. Between her desire to protect him and her understanding that sometimes, the only way to save someone is to let them go. The reality was painful to face, but it was undeniable. Sonny's actions had set a dangerous course, one that was already taking them further than any of them could have anticipated. As Carly watched Sonny lose himself in his own need for control, she realized that the true battle wasn't just for the family business, it was for his very soul. His obsession was consuming him, and the more he tried to fight it, the deeper he sank into the madness.